Wenn Helmut Schmidt überzeugt war, das Richtige zu tun, dann tat er es. Er war wirklich nicht immer einfach oder gar freundlich im Umgang. Seine Gegner können davon auch ein Lied singen. Aber, und das zählt, er war bereit, selbst den höchsten Preis zu zahlen. Denn die Gefahr des Scheiterns bei dem, was er tat, war stets einkalkuliert. Zuletzt selbst der Verlust seiner Kanzlerschaft. Gegen teils erhebliche Widerstände, auch in der eigenen Partei und in der Bevölkerung, hatte sich der Bundeskanzler Helmut Schmidt für den NATO-Doppelbeschluss eingesetzt. Dieser sah die Aufstellung von Mittelstreckenraketen in Westeuropa vor. Damit einher ging ein Verhandlungsangebot an die Sowjetunion, beiderseits auf diese Waffensysteme zu verzichten. Erst seinem Nachfolger im Amt des Bundeskanzlers, Helmut Kohl, sollte es gelingen, den NATO-Doppelbeschluss durchzusetzen. Doch letztlich waren es der Mut, für eigene Überzeugungen einzustehen und die Bereitschaft, Konsequenzen in Kauf zu nehmen, die Helmut Schmidt Achtung und Respekt bis heute eintrugen. Er war standhaft. Er war sich der Bedeutung seines Handelns für andere bewusst. Er sah es als seine Pflicht an, seine politische Gestaltungskraft auf das Gemeinwohl auszurichten. Bei allem Willen zur Tat. Er war davon überzeugt, dass eine Entscheidung nur dann reif zu fällen war, wenn sie vorher durchdacht und mit Vernunft durchdrungen war. Denken und Handeln gehörten für ihn untrennbar zusammen. Zu seinem nüchternen Pragmatismus kam seine Resistenz gegenüber ideologischer Einengung. Wer kennt sie nicht, die viel zitierte Empfehlung Helmut Schmidts: Wer Visionen hat, soll zum Arzt gehen. Er selbst hat die Aussage später wie folgt eingeordnet, ich zitiere: Es war eine pampige Antwort auf eine dusselige Frage. Zitat Ende. Helmut Schmidt kannte die Sehnsucht nach Idealen, nach großen Entwürfen für eine gerechtere Gesellschaft. Doch er wehrte sich gegen jede Form blinder Ideologie, sicher vor allem aufgrund seiner Erfahrungen im Nationalsozialismus.
Welcome to the Bali. Welcome to those of you who are watching online in your bathrooms, kitchens, mobile homes or offices. This is going to be an evening about Angela Merkel and her legacy, based on the excellent biography written by Ralph Bollmann, which was published in July in Germany and 4 weeks ago in the Netherlands. The evening is produced by the Bali and publishing house Arbeiderspers and the Duitsland Institute in Amsterdam. And it's going to be an evening in 3 languages, German, Dutch and English. Apparently, bilingual or trilingual events are very helpful in the fight against dementia. So enjoy. Guten Abend, liebes Publikum, herzlich willkommen in der Bali. Heute Abend sprechen wir über Angela Merkel und ihren Nachlass und all das wegen der hervorragenden Biografie, geschrieben bei Ralph Bollmann. Eine Übersetzung ist publiziert vor 4 Wochen hier in Holland. Und wie Sie verstehen, ist das heute Abend also ein Abend in mehrere Sprachen. Und anscheinend ist es gut in der Kampf gegen frühzeitige Demenz, mehrere Sprachen zu hören und zu sprechen. Welkom, lief publiek. U kunt straks, als het vragenuurtje is aangebroken, vragenkwartiertje, dat wil ik u alvast vertellen, vragen stellen in elke taal die u maar wilt. Maar het risico bestaat als u vragen stelt in het Hongaars dat u geen antwoord krijgt. Before I will tell you a bit about what's going to happen tonight, I'm going to introduce the guests to you. And if I make a mistake, please correct me. We have Ralph Bollmann, born in 1969. He studied political science, law and journalism. He worked for several German newspapers and magazines, to name just a few, Die Zeit, Süddeutsche and Taz. And currently is writing about economic policy for the Frankfurter Allgemeine Sonntagszeitung. He published several books. In 2013, his book Die Deutsche, Angela Merkel und wir, The Germans, Angela Merkel and Us was published. And this year, of course, Angela Merkel, die Kanzlerin ihrer Zeit. Angela Merkel, the Chancellor and her Times, came out. Kanzlerin is impossible to translate into English, unfortunately. Then there's Sophie Derksen. I couldn't find your date of birth on the internet, so should we keep it secret or? Okay, We keep it secret. Okay, cliffhanger. She's a journalist. She studied history and journalism, and she worked for Vrij Nederland, the correspondent, and for Die Zeit in Germany. She also made a podcast about Angela Merkel, and she spent some time as a diplomat at the Dutch embassy in Berlin. And then there is Iduna Paalman, born in 1991. She studied German culture and language. In 2019, her first collection of poetry was published, De Gom uit de hond halen, to take the grow out of the duck. If you come up at the end of the evening with a nice German translation, you can win a glass of champagne. And for this collection, she won the Poëzie Debuutprijs 2020. Especially for tonight, she wrote poems inspired by Merkel and all the difficulties she had to overcome. I'd like to start with the movie clip we just saw. Also because basically your book, your biography, starts with the same, not with the funeral of Helmut Schmidt, but also there is this famous quote, anyone who has visions should go to the doctor. It's funny because Mark Rutte, the Prime Minister of the Netherlands, said more or less the same, but he never mentioned Helmut Schmidt. Although I do believe that he said that Helmut Schmidt is one of his favorite politicians. But this is, I think the evening about Angela Merkel is an evening about whether politics is the art of the possibility of what's possible. And I'm interested also to find out with what ideals did Merkel enter politics and what is left of those dreams and ideals. Und dann jetzt gehen wir kurz nach Deutsch und wir sprechen. Die Bahn hat mir gesagt, wir können 15 Minuten reden auf Deutsch, sonst wird das Publikum böse. Also wir machen es 17 Minuten. Ich finde es immer gern, um etwas zu zitieren, damit die Leute auch etwas verstehen über das Buch, was sie wahrscheinlich noch nicht gelesen haben. Anyone of you has read the book already? Haben Sie das Buch schon gelesen? Bitte half. Die Hälfte, eine, 3/4, das ganze Buch, the whole book, anyone? No, okay. Am Anfang Ihres Buches sagen Sie, dass Merkel eine dreifache Außenseiterin ist. Sie ist also eine Frau, sie kam aus den DDR und sie ist Naturwissenschaftlerin. Und man hat dann den Eindruck, dass das etwas war, das alles schwieriger für sie gemacht hat. Aber nachdem ich das Buch gelesen habe, habe ich auch das Gefühl, eigentlich was ein Nachteil war, hat sich herausgegeben als ein Vorteil.
Ja.
Ist das auch, was Sie...
Glaube ich auch. Also sagen wir mal, es war zumindest nicht nur ein Nachteil. Und in den großen Krisen, die wir erlebt haben seit der Finanzkrise 2008, Finanzkrise, Eurokrise, Ukraine, Flüchtlinge, Klima, Corona und so weiter, war, glaube ich, diese Distanz, dieses Außenseitertum von großem Vorteil. Weil die meisten westeuropäischen Politiker, ob das nun der Bundesrepublik war, in den Niederlanden, Frankreich, sonst wo, die konnten sich ja gar nicht vorstellen, dass es zu so einem Systembruch kommen könnte. Also die Vorstellung war doch irgendwie immer, diese Verbindung aus Demokratie, Marktwirtschaft, Kapitalismus ist für ewig, da kann gar nichts passieren. Und Merkel hatte eben als DDR-Bürgerin 89, 90 schon diese Umwälzung aller Dinge erlebt und war darauf, glaube ich, in gewisser Weise besser vorbereitet und hat die Dinge auch kühler, eben distanzierter analysieren können. Genauso wahrscheinlich auch, was ihren Aufstieg innerhalb der Partei, innerhalb der CDU betraf, dass sie eben manche Dinge auch klarer sah als die Leute, die schon immer in der Jungen Union, in der Jugendorganisation mit 16 in die Partei eingetreten sind und dachten, bestimmte Dinge macht man immer so. Also beispielsweise in der Spendenaffäre. Ich glaube, diese Trennung von Helmut Kohl, die ja möglicherweise die CDU gerettet hat, das hätte niemand von den alten westdeutschen Christdemokraten machen können.
Das war 1999, dann hat sie einen Brief in den FAZ veröffentlicht, wo sie eigentlich geschrieben hat, also so, wegen der Spendeaffäre geht es nicht weiter mit den CDU. Kohl soll gehen als Ehrenvorsitzender.
Ja, genau. Und das ist ja von manchen in der westdeutschen CDU dann als übelst Machtpolitik ausgelegt worden, aber ich glaube, sie hat einfach nur klar gesehen, dass also zu dem Zeitpunkt noch nicht daran gedacht, dass sie das zur Parteivorsitzenden Kanzlerin machen könnte, sondern einfach nur klar gesehen, dass alles andere wahrscheinlich in den Untergang führt.
Meinen Sie, das war der mutigste Tat von Merkel? Sie hat ja gesagt, Sie schreiben in Ihrem Buch, ich bin mutig, sagt Merkel über sich selber, aber ich muss dazu, ich paraphrasiere jetzt.
Ich bin im entscheidenden
Moment mutig, genau. Aber es dauert ein Weilchen, bis ich mutig werde.
Ja. Es gibt ja diese Geschichte, ist oft kolportiert worden, wie sie in der Schule im Schwimmunterricht auf dem, weiß nicht, 3 Meter Brett, 5 Meter Brett steht und zögert zu springen. Und kurz bevor die Stunde zu Ende ist, kurz bevor das Pausenklingeln kommt, springt sie dann doch. So ungefähr. Naja, es gibt ja auch gewisse Situationen, in denen es sozusagen alternativlos ist. Und ich glaube tatsächlich, dass diese Vorstellung von Merkel als der ewig Zögerlichen stimmt zumindest nicht nur.
Nicht nur.
Es gibt auch ein paar andere Momente, wo man das, glaube ich, sagen kann. In der Flüchtlingsfrage vielleicht, gut, da musste sie natürlich auch irgendwie handeln. Das war nicht ganz freiwillig. Andererseits bei Kohl in der Spendenaffäre musste sie ja irgendwie auch. Also insofern, Mut würde ich ihr eigentlich nicht absprechen. Nein. Sie überlegt sich nur sehr genau, wann es sich lohnt, ein Risiko einzugehen. Und es gibt halt gewisse Konstellationen.
Das finde ich eine schöne Definition von Pragmatismus.
Ja, genau. Ja.
Wann lohnt es sich, ein Risiko anzugehen?
Ja, genau.
Und wenn es sich lohnt, mache ich es.
Ja.
Ganz überlegen.
Ja, also vielleicht hat sie jetzt so im Rückblick betrachtet ein paar Mal zu oft sich entschieden, es nicht einzugehen. Ja.
Wir haben noch nicht über das Frausein von Merkel gesprochen. Ich glaube, das hat auch geholfen bei ihrem Aufstieg innerhalb der CDU, weil Kohl brauchte eine Frau aus der DDR,
klar.
oder?
Also es war genau diese Dreifachquote, sonst wäre sie wahrscheinlich nicht Ministerin geworden, Anfang 1991. Kohl braucht eben jemanden, der diese Quote Frau und aus dem Osten erfüllt hat. Ja. Genau, ja. Er hat ja extra damals auch dieses Ministerium, was vorher zusammen war, für Frau und Familie extra aufgeteilt in 3 verschiedene Ministerien. Familie konnte Merkel sowieso nicht machen nach der politischen Logik, weil sie keine Kinder hat. Genau. Aber das Frauenministerium konnte man dann mit ihr besetzen. Ja. Das war übrigens, glaube ich, die erste Regierung in der Bundesrepublik, wenn ich mich richtig erinnere, in der mehrere Frauen vertreten waren. Ja.
Und war es dann auch noch wichtig, dass sie Naturwissenschaftlerin ist? Wie wichtig war das?
Ja, das ist genau. Da habe ich schon ein bisschen eben mit der Stirn gerunzelt, weil ich glaube, das ist von diesen 3 Punkten vielleicht das am wenigsten Wichtige. Ich glaube, diese Vorstellung, Merkel seziert die Politik mit naturwissenschaftlichen Maßstäben, stimmt so nicht ganz. Und sie hat das ja auch in gewisser Weise notgedrungen studiert, weil einfach die Naturwissenschaften nicht politisch beeinflusst waren, sozusagen in der DDR. Die Grundregeln der Physik kann man nicht außer Kraft setzen, sagte sie immer. Es spielt insofern eine Rolle, als sie nicht also die deutsche Politik ist ja sehr stark geprägt von Juristen. Und diese ganze Juristendenke, dass man eigentlich ständig immer nur erklärt, warum Dinge nicht gehen, das ist ihr immer fremd geblieben. Und natürlich hat sie aufgrund ihrer naturwissenschaftlichen Ausbildung bestimmte Dinge vielleicht besser verstanden, früher verstanden als andere. Klimawandel zum Beispiel, Atomenergie.
Aber ich verzeihe, dass ich Sie unterbreche, da hat sie nicht wirklich oder ganz spät gehandelt.
Genau, eben, das wollte ich gerade sagen. Daraus ist nicht immer Handeln entstanden, auch bei der Corona-Krise würde ich sagen, dass sie das vielleicht früher verstanden hat in den Folgen als andere, das hat sie in der ersten Phase vielleicht früher 2020 geholfen, aber später hat es ihr dann auch nicht mehr geholfen, politisch damit umzugehen.
Und wir werden später noch über die Eurokrise und Griechenland sprechen, zusammen mit Sophie, aber immer auch, was mich auch intrigiert hat, das, was auch europäisch oder auch geostrategisch notwendig ist. Sie hat immer wieder geguckt nach, was passiert in Deutschland. Wann sind es Wahlen, was passiert in Nordrhein-Westfalen, Rheinland-Pfalz und so weiter und so weiter. Immer also das eigene Überleben war doch ziemlich wichtig.
Ja,
das ist selbstverständlich. Aber
das war, glaube ich, auch für Europa wichtig. Also es ist ja in der Tat, ich habe mich das auch manchmal gefragt, wie hat sie das eigentlich geschafft, auch in Brüssel durchzusetzen, dass dann bestimmte Fristen bei Griechenland-Rettung oder so dann immer so gelegt wurden, dass man da über die deutsche Bundestagswahl drüber hinwegkommt. Aber ich glaube, das lag daran, dass die anderen Europäer auch Angst hatten davor, dass sie scheitert. Weil wenn sie über die Euro-Rettung gescheitert wäre, hätten wir ja in Deutschland nicht eine europafreundlichere, sondern eine europakritischere Regierung.
Und dann wäre die FDP, die ziemlich kritisch war. Ja, und auch die CDU teilweise.
Genau. Das hatte sie übrigens damals auch zu Barroso, der ja damals EU-Kommissionspräsident war, auch mal gesagt. Also ich kann ja immer die Dinge immer erst im letzten Moment machen, wenn sie sich als alternativlos darstellen lassen. Sonst verliere ich hier die Mehrheit und dann hat Europa auch nichts gewonnen.
Interessant, denn Merkel hat ja das Wort alternativlos selbst in den Mund genommen.
Ein einziges Mal bei der ersten Griechenland-Rettung.
Aber eigentlich hat sie sich auch so benommen oder irgendwie hat sie, sagen Sie jetzt, sie war selbst auch alternativlos. für Europa und für die Rettung von der Euro und so weiter, oder?
Ich glaube schon, ja. Also wenn sozusagen die Dinge in dem größten und wichtigsten Mitgliedsland ins Rutschen geraten wären, wäre es schwierig geworden.
Hätten wir vielleicht heute kein Euro. Kurz über das Verhältnis zu Merkel und die Deutsche. Ich nehme kurz einen Schluck Wasser. Da sagen Sie auch etwas, was mich erstaunt hat. Obwohl sie bei den Deutschen die meiste Zeit sehr beliebt war, erwidert sie diese Zuneigung insgeheim nicht. Hysterisch, verwöhnt, geschichtsvergessen, das waren Eigenschaften, die Merkel ihre Wählern schon lange vor der Flüchtlingsdebatte attestierte. Das sind ziemlich heite Worte.
Ja, aber ich glaube, das ist das große Paradoxon von Merkels Regierungszeit, dass sie selber die Deutschen sehr skeptisch gesehen hat. Übrigens gilt es für fast alle großen Kanzler. Adenauer hat ja auch die Westbindung gemacht, weil er den Deutschen misstraute. Ja. Kohl hat im Zusammenhang mit der Wiedervereinigung die europäische Einigung so stark vorangetrieben, weil er auch den Deutschen misstraute. Also insofern ist das sozusagen gar nicht so, aber das ist eine andere Art von Misstrauen, das stimmt. Also bei Merkel geht es ja gar nicht um die Frage, fangen die Deutschen wieder an, in Polen einzumarschieren, sondern es ging um die Frage, sind sie veränderungsbereit genug für diese Veränderungen, die jetzt anstehen in der Welt, auch um konkurrenzfähig zu bleiben oder was weiß ich.
Und der Antwort war, glaube ich, nein.
Merkels Antwort war nein. Sie hätte das Land gerne offener und beweglicher gemacht. Sie ist zweimal fast gescheitert damit, bei ihrer Wahl 2005 mit diesen wirtschaftspolitischen Reformen, 2015 in der Flüchtlingspolitik, was im Grunde ein ähnlicher Antrieb war, würde ich sagen. Dann hat sie es bleiben lassen. Und sie ist, und das meine ich mit Paradox, sie ist dann immer wieder gewählt worden als die Frau, die die Deutschen vor Veränderungen beschützt. Ja. Letztlich war also sozusagen diese Eigenschaften, die sie selbst so sehr im Grunde verachtet hat, waren die zu ihrem politischen Erfolg geführt haben.
Glauben Sie, um ein erfolgreicher Politiker zu sein, muss man das eigene Volk misstrauen oder ist das etwas typisch Deutsches?
Ich glaube, das ist schon typisch deutsch. Ich wollte nämlich gerade sagen, viele von den Dingen, die an Merkel besonders sind, haben auch mit Ost- und Westeuropa zu tun. Also ich glaube, dieses so ein bisschen wohlstandsverwöhnt und so weiter, das würde sie, wenn man sie ernsthaft fragt, wahrscheinlich allen Westeuropäern attestieren. Aber dieses dem eigenen Volk zu misstrauen, das ist, glaube ich, in Deutschland aufgrund der Geschichte schon stärker ausgeprägt. Ja.
Wir haben noch 5 Minuten. Ich will auf Deutsch noch zwei, noch zwei Sachen erledigen oder erwähnen. Über die Herren und Merkel. Das fand ich auch ziemlich skurril. Da sagen sie, es ist nicht Gift, sondern, das ist ein Zitat, das ist der junge Journalist Hajo Schumacher, der das sagt, es ist nicht Gift, sondern Geduld, mit der Merkel die Herren erledigt. Herrlich. Fast eine Art Macbeth. Sie erledigt die Herren. Aber sie hat es gemacht, vor allem innerhalb der CDU hat sie vielen Herren erledigt, oder?
Naja, eben nicht aktiv erledigt. Ich glaube, das ist immer wichtig zu sehen. Es gibt ja bei manchen auf dem konservativen Flügel der CDU die Vorstellung, sie ist irgendwie die Männermörderin. Aber im Grunde sind zumindest die allermeisten dieser Männer an sich selbst gescheitert. Und was Merkel auszeichnet, ist eben tatsächlich diese unglaubliche Geduld, das abwarten zu können. Und ihre Konkurrenten hatten diese Geduld eben nie. Also allen voran ihr schärfster innerparteilicher Widersacher Friedrich Merz, der ja zweimal jetzt versucht hat, ihre Nachfolge anzutreten in der CDU und der eben überhaupt nicht über diese Selbstbeherrschung verfügt. Ja.
Aber vielleicht ist es auch ein Ratschlag an alle anderen Frauen, um zu sehen, wie die Männer Niederlagen erlitten, muss man einfach abwarten. Man muss nichts selbst tun, sie tun es alles selbst. Warte ab und die Männer machen sich selbst fertig. Ja, das ist gut zu wissen, glaube ich.
Naja, es ist ein Stück weit auch weibliche Rationalität gegen männliche Emotionalität.
Genau. Ja. Mhm. Und dann, weil das ganze Mitte werden wir später mit Sophie besprechen, kurz an dieser herrliche Ausdruck. diese Methode von Merkel, die Sie sagen am Ende Ihres Buches im Kapitel Bilanz, dass das bezeichnen Sie als die asymmetrische Demobilisierung. Das heißt eigentlich, dass Merkel auch abwartet und wenn notwendig auch die Meinungen und das Programm von einem Gegner, von einer anderen Partei übernimmt und es sich zu ihr eigenen macht. Und eigentlich die Methode ist auch davon geprägt, dass man wirkliche Polarisierung auflösen muss. Alles bleibt nett und...
Ja, also die politische Landschaft sozusagen ein Stück weit einschläfern. Immer in der Erwartung, das hängt natürlich auch mit der Wählerstruktur zusammen, die CDU ist eine Partei, die stark von Rentnern gewählt werden, die gehen immer zur Wahl. Und die anderen Parteien, die haben nicht so eine treue Anhängerschaft. Und wenn man es schafft, dass bei SPD und Grünen die Leute denken, naja, ist doch eigentlich gar nicht so schlimm, wenn die Merkel Kanzlerin bleibt, dann gehen die nicht zur Wahl. Und dann gewinnt die CDU am Ende. Ja. Es ist natürlich ein bisschen gefährlich für die Demokratie, das ist ja deshalb oft vorgeworfen worden, obwohl ich andererseits auch finde, wir leben ja nun mal in anderen Zeiten, die politischen Frontlinien haben sich verändert und ich glaube, die Unterschiede zwischen Sozialdemokratie und Christdemokratie, zwischen den klassischen Volksparteien, sind ja auch wirklich nicht mehr so groß. Die spielen sich zwischen anderen Kräften ab, mit den Rechtspopulisten oder so. Und diese Gegensätze künstlich zu inszenieren, davon halte ich ehrlich gesagt auch nicht. Ja.
Und eigentlich hat ja auch die SPD die letzte Wahl gewonnen, indem der Kandidat hat gesagt, mehr oder weniger, oder ich bin der wirkliche Merkel-Nachfolger.
Ja, im Grunde ging der deutsche Wahlkampf ja um die Frage, wer ist der beste Merkel-Imitator.
Und das war anscheinend nicht Laschet. Okay, wir machen jetzt weiter auf Englisch. I will summarize a bit for those of you who couldn't understand the German that Mr. Bollmann had said that Merkel is not really courageous. Yes? She had three disadvantages being a woman.
She's courageous in the right moment.
She's courageous in the right moment. The three disadvantages coming from Eastern Germany, being a scientist and being a woman, were also advantages. We discussed briefly how she saw and see the Germans, her own people, and Mr. Bollmann said that she distrusted her own people. Then I asked the question whether this was a good idea for all politicians or something typical for Germany, and the answer was that is this something typical for Germany? And in the end was about the distinction between the Social Democrats and the Christian Democrats, and Mr. Bollmann said that the distinction nowadays isn't that big anymore. It's more about the extremes, on the left and on the right, and you should not artificially make this distinction bigger just to please the voters. More or less you agree? Okay, then I'd like to invite Sophie Derksen to come to the table.
Born in 1984, by the way.
Born in 1984. Ah, thank you. Before, just one quick question. Would you, because you made a podcast about Merkel, I was in the podcast.
Two, actually.
Two.
Yes, to
Apologies.
be actually right.
I had the impression that you are the biggest Merkel fan in the Netherlands, or one of the biggest. Is this totally wrong?
Someone told you so?
No, I had the impression.
You had the impression? No, I would never say that I'm a fan. I strongly oppose to that
to the word
title. Or? No, I'm fascinated by her.
Okay.
I've made 2 podcasts about her and about her life. I'm very fascinated by the paradoxes that you also came up with. Especially, I think this modesty or this uneasiness with her own power, as you've also explained. And what I find very interesting is that there's also rumors that even this uneasiness, this modesty, is a very calculated expression of power. I was, for example, very curious whether you would agree with that. So I'm mainly fascinated. I'm absolutely not a fan. That would be
admiration?
not very objective as a journalist.
Okay, admiration also? No?
No, okay. Fascination.
Okay, we're going to talk about Greece and the euro crisis, which ended in 2015, but it's also all going to be introduced by Iduna Paalman, who wrote a poem about it, correctly?
Die zal ik in het Nederlands doen. The translation will be on screen. Ben je er klaar voor, Joline? Ik heb een gedicht geschreven in 3 delen. En het gaat in elk deel over een crisismoment in het leven van Angela Merkel. Het gedicht heet in zijn totaliteit Lieve kanselieren. En het is er goed bij te vertellen dat jullie dat zijn. In het kader van het feit dat we allemaal diep in ons hart een klein beetje Angela Merkel zijn. Dit zijn crisisgedichten. Let op, lieve kanselieren, er zal iets op het spel staan en dat gaan jullie voelen in ten eerste de borstkas, ten tweede de ademhaling, ten derde de portemonnee. Zoals jullie al konden raden gaat dit over geld. Jullie dachten dat het over liefde ging, maar dat blijkt dus niet waar. Wisten jullie dat genegenheid een monetaire eenheid is? Hoeveel je van de ander houdt, blijkt je uit te kunnen rekenen. Het schijnt dat we geheel zijn opgebouwd uit de heilzame circulatie van winst en verlies. Goed, het gaat om een schuld van 12,5% van het nationaal inkomen en een steunsom van 110 miljard euro. Als we onszelf moeten corrigeren, doen we dat door eerst even diep in door de neus, uit door de mond. En ook afleiding zoeken is in een crisis altijd een heel goed idee. Armoede is een bijproduct. Laat je vallen en maak je niet druk aan welke kant van je lichaam de opvang klaar staat. De vertrouwensoefening is niet voor iedereen weggelegd. We geloven in pyjama's die elke nacht dezelfde dekens delen. De spirit van het kapitalisme en de logica van de markt. Maar dat geloof kunnen we niet garanderen. Jullie vragen je af, welke productiviteitsgegevens hebben we nodig om tot redding over te gaan? Welke disbalansen moeten we als de bliksem wegwerken? Welke munt devalueert tot welk steenachtig voertuig? Als je meer consumeert dan je produceert, heb je het dan aan jezelf te danken? Jullie denken dat jullie het hulpeloze slachtoffer zijn van onbesuisde valutaspeculatie. Dat dacht ik zelf ook. Tot ik kwam waar ik nu ben. Rillend naast jullie, in een klam bed. Ik ben jullie crisiskanselier en ik zeg het 1 keer. Treed als het kan aarzelend op. Geef ontwijkende antwoorden. Als je het slim speelt, is afwachten de meest effectieve manier van in actie komen.
Thank you, Iduna. But we cannot guarantee that faith. That's a nice explanation of why Mario Draghi, I believe in 2012, had to save the euro by saying whatever it takes. We will save the euro by whatever it takes, and those words save the euro. I'd like to speak about what happened back then with Greece and with the euro by starting with a quote again. I will read it first in German and then the English, we will talk in English about it. Merkel said, ich bin eine Pragmatikerin und eine Freundin des schäublischen Denkens. Das besagt, man soll die Sachen von Ende her denken und nicht von der momentanen Popularität her. Entscheidend ist nicht, was heute in der Presse steht, sondern wie die Menschen in 2 Jahren darüber denken werden. Merkel said in times of the euro crisis that she's very pragmatic and that she is in love, well, that she follows her Minister of Finance, Schäuble, who was back at that time quite conservative, and he didn't want to give in to the demands of Greece and its politicians. And Merkel said that we shouldn't focus on what's today in the newspapers, but we should look at what people think in about 2 years. My question for both of you is, do you think that she followed up on this declaration? And do you think do you think it was a mistake? 2 questions. Did she follow up, and was the mistake of hers to say that she followed das Schäublische Denkens?
No, it's a little bit different or complicated with her relationship to Wolfgang Schäuble, because at the beginning of the Eurozone crisis, Schäuble wanted to take very much money to save the euro and to create a deeper integration of the Eurozone, and it was Angela Merkel who didn't want that because she had, for her, the experience at the beginning of her chancellorship with Europe was the failure of the European Constitution in France and the Netherlands. And she thought that she was the woman who had to deal with the great visions of Chancellor Kohl and to to clean up
the mess.
The mess, yeah, exactly.
But you also you write in a book that Kohl was really a European by heart.
Yeah.
And for her, for Merkel, it was more something pragmatic, more something that she...
Yes, of course. For her, as a woman from Eastern Germany, she looked to the Federal Republic, she looked to the United States of America. That was completely different from her generation of Western Germans, for whom France and Italy were the countries where they looked on and the reference. Yeah? And step by step, she entered the European politics, and she understood how important the relationship with France is, for example, and so on. At the end, she ended up as a European by conviction, but also, of course, because in other countries the Euroscepticism grew so much, and it became always more difficult to keep the things together. And I think it was, at that moment, it was too late for Schäuble's big vision of a more integrated, more integration in Europe than in the old member states of Europe. I think Wolfgang Schäuble wanted to use a Grexit, the shock of a Grexit, to have a better integration between Germany, Benelux, France, and so on. Yeah.
But she was convinced that the Grexit would lead to the failure of the euro, and that the failure of the euro would lead to the end of the European Union.
That's why she called her politics alternativlos, the word that you used before. Yeah. And I think that's remarkable in this particular phase, that she used this word, because by doing so, she basically pushed aside everyone who was thinking differently about these issues as irresponsible. I mean, she portrayed it, her way of her solution as the most reasonable way, the most sensible one. So all those people who were not following her course were put aside as not rational, not sensible. And I think, I mean, it's not by accident that the big party that came out of all this, the Alternative für Deutschland, is called so, because they said, sorry, there is an alternative to this course. And I find it very interesting to see that she used, I guess, highly moralizing terms to defend her way of rescuing the European currency.
But do you mean this as a criticism or as
it's a question. I mean, you could argue, I would say, that she contributed to the radicalization of the Alternative für Deutschland by morally putting people away and not really talking to them, not going into debate with them. You just said something about the risk for democracy, and I would say that this could be a risky tactic. I would be curious to hear how you. Well,
I think the Eurozone crisis is, for me, it's the decisions she took in the Eurozone crisis are those where I have the biggest question marks in her career.
In terms of?
Because I could imagine that if at the beginning of the Eurozone crisis, perhaps Wolfgang Schäuble was right, that it would have been better to use this shock. You can always, changes are only possible in big crises. And at the moment of the big shock at the beginning of the Eurozone crisis, it would have been possible, perhaps, to get a deeper integration in Europe and to avoid all that shocks that followed in the 2 years.
Just for the chronology, this is 2011.
2010 to 2012, yeah. The worst period was 2011, indeed, when she began to cry
with Obama
at the G20 summit in Cannes in France.
And Obama had to comfort her.
Obama and Sarkozy pressed her to give more money, and she said, "I cannot do that in Germany. I have my coalition partner against me, the liberals, the Bundesbank, the Federal Reserve Bank, and the Constitutional Court, which was very skeptical against more European integration too. Perhaps it wouldn't have been possible, I don't know. But at the end, the method she took worked, and
worked in which sense? Because she was not really defending her policy. She was crying, and then she said, "Sorry, I don't have an alternative."
She said at the beginning, she said there's no alternative. Afterwards, she said there is no reasonable alternative. That's a difference.
Yeah. And you said it only once.
Or no responsible alternative. And of course, for her, the things which the Alternative, the AfD, wanted to do were not reasonable and wouldn't work in practice.
Maybe for the audience, we should explain that at that time the AfD was still a party found anti-Euro by Bernd Lucke, an economist. Yeah. So, but by criticizing Merkel, I feel like you're criticizing, which is perfectly fine. I mean, we are not here to dismiss. But what you said, what was the result of what she did? And she said, well, she saved the euro, you can say, together with Draghi, but she did. Would you have preferred an outcome with more political fights within Germany?
I would just be curious.
Even if it would have meant that we would not have a euro today.
I would be curious to know what would have happened within Germany if she would have really brought up the debate, because I'm just always curious to understand why she was not able to really engage into a debate with a large amount of Germans.
But that was
already about the alienation between her and a part, at least, of the Germans before. I would just be curious to understand. I mean, there is this politician, Jan Werner Müller, who wrote in Foreign Policy, I believe in 2018, technocracy paves the way to populism. And he criticizes her. I would not, it's not really about my position. I'm just curious to understand. You have studied her and her motives and everything she said about it. Was she not able to engage with those people? Was she too morally appalled by having a different view?
But Sophie, I want to know your position.
I think the dilemma, as you just posed it, is a bit exaggerated. I would say that I have personally not understood enough about her motives to judge, so that's why I want to know.
But in a way, it's a political style, not to undermine the debate, but all her life she has tried to prevent too much fighting.
Yeah.
And so why is the question?
Yeah, I'm not completely sure if it would have been useful in that situation. Of course, it would not have been possible to convince those people who afterwards voted for the AfD. But of course, the Eurosceptics are a small minority in Germany. Germany was always a country where a huge majority of the people were in favor of European integration.
Yes.
My question about her politics in the Eurozone crisis is when you see that in 2012, when she definitely decided to keep Greece in and said that publicly, I think that she never...
Again, Schäuble.
She always kept that in mind, and she didn't want to risk a Brexit at no point of the crisis. But when she said that publicly in 2012, after that famous Draghi words and so on, public opinion in Germany changed suddenly. Before, it was 50-50 if Greece should belong to the Eurozone or not. Yes. And afterwards, after Merkel took the clear decision to keep Greece in, a vast majority of Germans said, yes, okay, we should keep it in. And so one of the institutes which makes the polls told me that he thinks in such a complicated issue, no one really understands what's the problem with Greece and so on. It is always quite easy to be successful with political leadership. And perhaps it would have been necessary at that situation, but of course for Angela Merkel it would have brought the risk to lose her power in Germany. And one time she told the chief of the European Commission at that time, Barroso from Portugal, that if Germany would get a new government, more critical towards European integration, it would be worse, of course.
But basically,
can I ask one thing?
No, can I ask? No. Afterwards, because you asked the question, and I don't want to answer the question on behalf of Mr. Bollmann. Basically, I'm not sure if you read the book.
Yeah.
So you can find the answer in the book, I would say, if you want to know. Because Merkel said, "Man gewinnt Wahlen in die Mitte." You win elections in the middle. And also, as was pointed out before, the differences between SPD, CDU, and the Grüne, between the Social Democrats, the Christian Democrats, and the business-friendly liberals, the FDP, were not that big already at that time. So I would say, my assumption, based on reading this book, is that Merkel's strategy was that you cannot win elections in the middle if you have too much fighting going on, because apparently the voters, especially in Germany, they don't like that much of the fight and the polarization. And
I understood. It's just that I was curious to know whether you would agree with this famous thesis that technocracy paves the way to populism, as Merkel has been firstly criticized by, for example, Werner Müller. It's not my criticism, it's his. That's what I...
But you bring it up, so it must be also yours.
It's fascination. Yeah. That's it. Yeah.
I'm not sure if Merkel is so much technocratic. She's really a politician, and she sees things from a political point of view. It's different from Italy, for example. In Italy, I think it's now, at the moment, everybody is happy about this government of experts in Italy. I don't know if it's good for
democracy. Led by Draghi, by the way.
Yeah. I don't know if it's good for democracy on the long run. Because at a certain point, parties will come back and no one knows what will happen. But I think that Merkel is not so much a technocrat. She is a pragmatic politician, and
but it's a thin line between a technocrat
and of course it's true that Germans don't like the conflict so much.
You mentioned polling as well, and I think it's a nice phrase as well from the poem we just heard. Waiting it out is the most effective way to take action.
Yeah.
You just mentioned that the polls changed, the public opinion changed in the course of events. There's a lot of rumor always about Merkel and her famous secret polls that she does herself. I was curious, did you find out yourself more about what she polls?
Well, of course, her office in the Kanzleramt, exactly. Of course, they do many polls.
Yes, but that's not so serious. I mean, every politician, Obama, and
especially about the preferences of Germans, and that's why she created in 2017 those campaign in einem Land, in dem wir gut und gerne leben, a country in which we like to live. That didn't work at the end because the debate about the refugees came back. But I think that was always her idea. And, well, I think it's not completely wrong, of course, that many people in their everyday life have other concerns than Eurozone or refugees. They want to know if there's enough childcare, if the pension system works.
But it's also in your book, and I will come back to the secret polling, because it sounds also a bit like you believe in conspiracy theories going out from the Kanzleramt, the word secret.
Would you agree?
No. No. What do you mean by secret?
No,
politicians are entitled to do their own
of course,
pollings.
It's not criticism, it's just fascination that it's always brought up with Merkel that she has her own polls and that she strongly looks at them because internationally she's always portrayed as the one with the moral convictions, but she's also very strongly looking at what the population...
In the book, it's very clear that she's not a woman with very strong moral convictions. And on a few occasions...
A mixture, I would say, between a pragmatic way of dealing with everyday politics. If the taxes are 1% higher or lower, that's not a question of convictions, of course, and her personal convictions, which are very strong in some fields, against right-wing extremism, for liberal democracy, and so on.
But also in the beginning of her career, she let a certain CDU politician fester. You mentioned, I cannot remember now his name, but who really made remarks on the on the Hitler time, in a very frivolous, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So at that time she was not very keen on taking action. But going back on what you said, that average citizens, they have other interests than what's going on with you and Greece. There's also, you said in this book, it's, that if there are no large political problems, the small problems become large. So there's always something to worry about. So there's always, it's like a continuum of if there's no big crisis, a small one will appear that will look like a crisis.
Yeah, and it's always bad for a politician to have a focus on problems which are not discussed yet, because you always get problems. That was a big problem, of course, in the refugees debate in 2015, because the mistakes were made before. That there was not enough money for the refugees camps in the region and so on. But I think that Merkel is, it's a little bit cynical, but she's right, of course, that it's not good to say, well, we have a problem, we will have a problem in 5 years, so we should take action now, because you won't find a majority for that. But then, for example, with Corona, with the problems in German health administration, if Mrs. Merkel had said 2 or 3 years ago, we need 1 million euros for our health administration, everyone would have said, no, why should we need that? And afterwards, if the crisis is there and everyone can see the crisis, she can spend billions and billions and no one cares about that.
It's leading from behind, as it's called, right? Yes.
Yeah. But do you believe there's another option? Not only for Merkel in her times, but for politicians in general? Don't they need a crisis in order to make changes?
Yes, but the interesting thing, what interests me with Merkel and her behavior during crisis is, does she explain her conduct? I think there's still many questions towards the political motives that she had.
But at every point when she was more outspoken and explained much more, she got in trouble.
Exactly.
With economic reforms, 2003, 2005, with the refugees, 2015, and even a little bit in the COVID crisis at the end.
Yes.
Yeah.
But do you believe? Yeah. Well, we go to the next quote about, which is, I think, there's connections about security and reassurance. Again, I will read in German first. Sympathiewerten waren nicht zuletzt dem Umstand geschuldet, dass sie den Deutschen nicht bloß alle Zumutungen vom Leib hielt, sondern im Grunde jede Art von Beunruhigung. Auch 2 Jahrzehnte nach dem Fall des Eisernen Vorhangs dominierte noch immer das alte Sicherheitsdenken die Perspektive der Westdeutschen. Das hat die Physikerin, die ihre politische Karriere im Systembruch von 89-90 begann, spät begriffen, dafür aber nun umso mehr verinnerlicht. Okay, so basically here it's that she finally, after a while, she came to the conclusion that especially the people in Western Germany disliked all risks, and what they really were looking for is, and it's also the famous, that's how Adenauer campaigned, I believe, in the 50s, nur keine Experimente, just no experiments, so they were looking for security and some politician that could offer the security. My question for you, Sophie, is do you believe that she managed, if this is the perspective, if this is what she was, why she was voted into office, did she manage to give the Germans enough security?
Big question again. Well, what I find interesting is that she talks about, I think you've put it, Ralph, very nice in the book. When I paraphrase, you write, she learned along the way how little change people in the Western world that she admired so deeply, especially coming from former East Germany, actually want or can endure. And this alienation between her and the Germans is, I think, interesting. We already talked about the West, that she basically found spoiled, right? Verwöhnte Biester, in a way. It's also interesting to look at her relationship to the eastern part of Germany, and did she bring stability and security out there? She's criticized fiercely from the former eastern side. And what I find very intriguing is that she herself is also a bit hurt, I would say, by this whole idea of Merkel being a German who had to learn to be a Bundesdeutsche or a European, as you just put it, right? I think recently in Halle, she said something about it in last October. She said she was hurt by that idea of hers, that she was...
By those complaints,
yes,
especially coming from Eastern.
Yes.
And maybe this is before we go to the refugee, and Iduna is again going to read a poem, but maybe this is something you can say also, explain a bit the big differences still, if you also look at elections and the perspectives between 20, 30 years after the fall of the wall, between Eastern Germany and West Germany. And if you have the feeling, and this is also basically what Sophie mentioned, that she betrayed at least some of her fellow DDR burger.
Of course, her relationship with her the other East Germans always was very complicated, because she came from a small minority as a pastor's daughter, as an academic, intellectual. In the GDR, only 5% of the population went to university. So it was always a little bit difficult, and especially after the refugees crisis. And I think you can explain that with a phenomenon which is quite usual in processes of migration, because the East Germans were immigrants in her own country, in the Federal Republic, a minority. If there comes a new group of immigrants, it's always the people which came last before who are the most have the most opposition against the new immigrants, because they always think, well, it would have been better to do something for us and not for the others who are coming now. Yeah.
You want something? Do you have something to add?
I think I'll save it for the discussion about the migration crisis.
Okay,
about the friendly face.
The friendly face of whom? Of Merkel.
Well, yes. Let's maybe first go to Iduna. Yeah? Exactly. Yes.
Iduna.
We gaan naar 2015. Jullie worden wakker na een doorwaakte onderhandelingsnacht. En ik weet dat jullie zijn moe en niet op jullie mooist. Toch wil ik met jullie in gesprek blijven. Is het tijd voor een openingsstatement? Voordat we de gebroken agenda afwerken, vragen 890.000 mensen onze aandacht. Ze kunnen het woord veiligheid niet meer verstaan omdat hun taal is veranderd. En de vraag is nu, organiseren we een welkomstfeest of een samenscholingsverbod? Welke woorden en welk straatbeeld en plein geven we terug als invuloefening? Of is het te laat voor grammatica? We hebben experts nodig met emotieloze lesbevoegdheden en een groot rijbewijs. Iemand die de zeegrenzen als zeegrenzen herkent. Die weet wanneer we spreken over liefde, wanneer over een sussende teneur, een inwisselbare personality, het omruilen van het ene thuis voor het ander. 1 teken kan ik jullie vastgeven. Alles duurt lang en is toch overhaast. We zijn de volksverraders en de leugenpers, de kinderen en hun moeder, de burgemeesters en het afgezegde mannenkoor. Er staat opvang klaar. In de meeste gevallen ontstaat een brand niet natuurlijk, maar wordt hij gesticht. Ik ben jullie getransformeerde crisiskanselier en mijn statement luidt: het gaat ons lukken. We deden het prima. Aan de inzet heeft het nooit gelegen.
I can give you one hint at least. Everything takes forever. Yes, that's for sure. To give, we go to Eastern Germany and to the Willkommenskultur, to the welcome culture. Not to defend Merkel, but sometimes I feel I'm pushed in that position tonight, but that's fine. You wrote in your book that in Thuringia, Thüringen, between 1991 and 2018, there were 280% more foreigners. Imagine 700-280% more foreigners in that period. You compare it to Hamburg, the city of Hamburg, and there were at the same time 45% of more foreigners. So besides the fact that Mr. Bollmann already said, of course, if you feel like a newcomer, the newest newcomer is always your enemy, which sounds to me plausible. Wouldn't you say that this 728% And again, I'm not here to defend the people of Thuringia, nor the people who voted for AfD there, quite the opposite. But it might explain a bit, no?
Yes, well, the thing, of course, is that I think that there's a lot of unclarity still about Merkel's motives out there. Why she chose to not close the borders at that time. And I think especially this phrase of hers, this famous phrase of Merkel saying, I don't want to apologize to show a friendly face, right?
But let's go back. I want to know from you, not so much now, can you imagine the people in Thuringia who voted for AfD, given the fact that it had an influx of 728%?
Yeah, well, of course, I think there's a lot to be said for the fact that the eastern part of Germany does not have this tradition of migration historically. I've seen people standing on the streets in Dresden who are very, very frightened because of what was happening when I was working out there. But still, I can also understand Merkel, who was deeply hurt, I guess, that she felt that she had to apologize for showing a friendly face, as she said it herself, especially towards the people who were actually accusing her of not being a real-born German and a real-born European. I was curious, how do you look at that phrase?
Before Mr. Bollmann, I want to quote you, because maybe it's here already. In the capital, in a chapter about Willkommenskultur, there's this sentence. Die Kanzlerin folgte der Stimmung in dieser Anfangszeit eher, als sie bewusst zu befördern. At that time, 2015, many Germans, a majority of Germans, were very much in favor of it.
Yeah.
So she didn't see,
No, of course.
Yeah, of course. The story started, I think, with this situation in August, mid-August 2015, when she visited a school in Rostock in northern Germany, and there was a girl coming from Lebanon who asked, can we stay in Germany?
The famous crying girl. Yes.
And Merkel was very harsh and said, no, not everyone can stay here in Germany. It is possible that you have to go back. And that, of course, there was a huge wave of criticism against the Chancellor. And that was, of course, one aspect. But there were many other aspects. I think it was not so much, indeed, about the refugees themselves. She was not a Mother Teresa. No. That was not because of her father, who was a pastor, and so on. Some very, very personal convictions were in...
Moral convictions, right?
Yeah. For example, of course, as a former GDR citizen, not to create new borders in Germany. To her vice chancellor of that time, Sigmar Gabriel, one time she said, we won't build new walls in Europe, won't we? That was really crucial for her. And there were those right-wing demonstrations against refugees camps in Saxonia and so on. And I think she wanted to avoid the impression that she gives any space, and she takes decisions under the pressure of right-wing protests, of course. Yes, and of course the experience of the GDR that it is not possible to stop people who are always on the way. Because already on the way. Because, for example, in 1989, when there were the refugees in the embassies of Western Germany in Prague and Budapest, the GDR said, well, they have to go back through the GDR, and that created new protests, new problems, of course. And
that was the end of the GDR, basically.
Exactly, yeah. And of course, after we were talking about the Eurozone crisis, and the last rescue program for Greece was some weeks earlier. And I think it was also because of the image of Germany in Europe and in the world. And even Viktor Orban from Hungary would have said, well, you can see that the Germans are so cruel with Greece, and now they are so cruel with the refugees.
But it's not only the image, right? Because I think remember Bernd Ulrich from die Zeit, the German newspaper, pointed out that at that point, when she made that decision, Germany was in a position of unprecedented hate and power.
Because of the Greece crisis.
Exactly, because not only Greece, but previously Merkel was sent to Ukraine to manage the whole Minsk situation, so that she deeply felt, probably, that they could really do it, as she said. It was not only repairing the image, but it was also a heartfelt, I would say, in defense of the Chancellor.
It was the aspect we were talking about earlier, that she wanted to make the country more open to change. And of course, I think she thought,
less provincial.
Where is the problem? 800,000 people and they come from Syria, Iraq, and and we have the experience that people from Syria and Iraq are integrating quite well in Western countries.
But she was astonished, I guess, that there would be a problem in the eastern part of Germany, right? She did not expect so.
Also, maybe it's
up to these days, just 2 days ago, she explained in a German newspaper why she always avoided the expression refugees crisis, because she said, well, Eurozone crisis was a real crisis and so on, COVID, but it's not a crisis when some human beings are coming to our country.
But maybe
she said it too. So one final thing. She said it 2 days ago. Do you feel she explained enough at the time what she was doing? That was actually my whole point with technocracy and.
Well, she was much more outspoken than ever, but she didn't explain it very well. That's true. But
she have explained more?
It was because of the harsh opposition by the right wing, by the AfD, by the CSU, and so on. And well, that's typical for her. That if she is under pressure, she reacts with pressure herself. And I think a little bit, I don't want to make too much psychology, but it's a little bit, it's her experience to belong to a minority in the GDR, to belong to a minority in the CDU for such a long time. And so she doesn't want to be the object of...
It might be important also to remember that at the time that she said it, that the refugees were walking already, that from Budapest to Austria opened the borders. There was no way, I mean, she didn't close the borders. They didn't close the borders. So basically there was no way of, unless she wanted to let Austria down. But speaking also about the flip side of that coin, what came afterwards, Mother Teresa, there was this deal struck with Turkey, of course. I think we should discuss that as well. And then, you're right, Mr. Bollmann, den Ausschlag gab, dass die Flüchtlinge bereits vor der Tür standen. I mentioned it. Hätte sich die Opfer des Bürgerkriegs zum jetzigen Zeitpunkt vom Mittelmeer erst auf den Weg gemacht, dann wäre die Lage ganz anders gewesen. Die Flüchtlinge, die ein halbes Jahr später, nach der Schließung der Balkanroute, im griechischen Grenzort Idomeni strandete, interessierte die deutsche Kanzlerin wenig. She couldn't care less about refugees that were far away, half a year later, in a Greek border town named Idomeni. So what does that tell you, Sophie, about Merkel?
Pragmatism, I guess.
Pragmatism.
As you've just defined it yourself. Well, of course, she's heavily criticized for this deal with Erdogan at the time. And I also find it fascinating to see that, of course, she's heralded internationally for her not closing the borders. But, for example, in the podcast I made, I had a migrant expert saying, yes, well, in the end, she did not succeed to really go to the root of this whole migration problem in Europe, because still, under her rule, we have changed nothing to the fact that people have to come to European soil to ask for asylum. And she held on to her solution of trying to distribute people over Europe. And she did, well, of course, find a lot of opposition in the eastern part of Europe. So,
do you mean, Sophie, that she should have done more to intervene in why the people came to Germany in the first place? The war in Syria, the deteriorating situation in Afghanistan?
Well, of course, I mean, the Germans have a very large program, I guess, of helping in the region, and all, I think one of the largest within Europe, if I'm correct. So they, of course, were also addressing this part of the problem, of this very complex problem. But still, the fact that she was not able to really find a solution in Europe is, I think, something to at least, review rather critically. And the question, of course, is, could she have done otherwise? How would you say?
She said herself that she had made mistakes before. Yeah. She said the famous words 1 year after the beginning of the refugees crisis debate. If I could, I would go back in time for many years. Yeah, but with that she doesn't care about refugees who are far away. I think that's not so much a contradiction because she told that already in her famous press conference in summer 2015, wir schaffen das.
Here, in Germany.
But she didn't say, wir schaffen das, we will manage that by taking all people from all over the world. She said, wir schaffen das by pulling out those who have no right of asylum, by closing the external borders of the European Union, and so on.
But we know by now, especially by now, that the methods with which Turkey prevented refugees from coming to Europe and thus to Germany were not very friendly, to say the least. So how would you, in hindsight, what's your opinion about the deal, also for you, Sophie, the deal she struck with Erdogan?
Well, that's a good question. I think for her it was the only possibility to avoid new borders within Europe, to make the external borders of Europe more secure, to avoid that refugees come to Europe from outside.
But do you feel she held on too long to this solution of hers, of mainly trying to distribute people within Europe, which in the end didn't succeed, and then she only had this option of going to Turkey in her worldview? Would you agree that she held on too long to that tactic?
Of course, it was a mistake to make this majority decision in Brussels about how the refugees are verteilt, distributed in Europe, of course. With the deal with Turkey, I'm not so sure. By the way, it was Wolfgang Schäuble who told me that he gave her the advice in summer 2015. You have to talk with Erdogan. Yeah.
There are many fathers of this great idea.
Of course, that was so much criticized in Germany, but I'm not sure if the German public is sometimes too idealistic in foreign policy and thinks, well, we should only talk. A German chancellor shouldn't talk to foreign politicians who are not real Democrats, real liberals, and so on. And so you can do no foreign policy with this.
German voters are a bit blue-eyed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Before we go to Brexit and Trump, I'd like to mention what happened in Cologne in on New Year's Eve 2015, 2016, because according to your book and according to many others, this really was a moment of change in the public opinion. As you might remember, that evening, and it became only public, I think a few days or even weeks. A few days later, that some men, apparently, according to the police, who looked African or who looked North African, harassed women. And this really, and then also Merkel gave a press conference, and she was she used strong words to condemn this behavior. Do you think, also you, Sophie, that this was really a turning point in the public opinion? And also I'd like to, speaking about disappointments by Merkel, is this sentence, I'd like to read it. which happened in after this night in Cologne. Der bayerische Ministerpräsident begab sich damit, wie die Juristen Stefan Dettchen und Maximilian Steinbach später zeigten, tief hinein in rechtlich haltlose Denkmuster der neuen Rechte und der AfD. Wie sich solche Verschwörungstheorie bis in die Mitte der Gesellschaft hinein versetzen konnte, das gehörte zu Merkels Desillusionierungen in ihrer späten Amtszeit. So also within her own political party there was like this right-wing conspiracy theory came up, and this was one of the biggest disillusions.
Well,
yes. Yeah, no, go ahead. Sophie.
To answer your question, I guess, I mean, I remember it very well because I worked in Germany at the time. All the newspapers wrote Kontrollverlust, the loss of control after this night in Cologne, one night in Cologne. And I believe that's something, as I understand as a Dutch journalist observing Germany for a while, deeply felt within Germany. If the government has lost its control over the events happening, it's a fierce thing. So I understood that as a turning point, yes, absolutely. And I guess that Merkel as well saw that in the end her phrase of "we will manage" was actually not happening at the time, especially because of all the problems of bureaucracy and federalism, federal authorities not working together too well to register people, for example. In the end, it turned out that many people who were present there in Cologne were registered as an asylum seeker. So I believe that it was a moment of losing control, but also of being confronted as a German with authorities who were not actually ready for the job. And I believe that's why it was a fierce turning point that she had to she acted upon.
Yeah, but I think it's a little bit different problems. Of course, that loss of control was a problem, and that German authorities needed a whole year to say how many refugees came in. At the end, it was 800,000, more or less the same which was estimated before. But of course, there were many space for speculation, and the AfD could say, well, there are 2 million, and the government was not able to say, no, we know the exact number, but they didn't knew that.
They didn't have the facts.
Yeah, and of course, that's the same problems with German bureaucracy and federalism and so on we saw in the COVID crisis last year. But the other thing I mentioned in this quote you read just now is that the CSU, the Bavarian party, said that Merkel broke the law. And that was really, very strange, because one of the motivations why Merkel didn't close the border was that closing the border would have broken the law and not keeping it open. Yeah,
that really hurt.
And that sort of nonsense debates with no relation to facts. Fake news. It's fake news to say it.
Coming from our own political party. Let's emphasize that. Coming from our own political party or the sister party.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Do you believe that the events in Cologne have been exaggerated? Because
I'm not sure, because it's still not completely clear what really happened at that night.
Which is very telling as itself, right?
The public reactions were exaggerated, of course. It's unfortunately, I think, in all the Western democracies, it's so extreme. In the first part of the refugees crisis, I always say crisis, I'm sorry. I hope Angela Merkel won't look...
No, I don't think so. No.
At the beginning, all of the German media, even the Bild-Zeitung, the famous tabloid, said, well, it's great that so many refugees come to Germany. And after the New Year's Eve in Cologne, other people said, that shows that integration is not possible at all. Muslims, it's not possible to integrate Muslims in the German society. And that was really, really strange, and that was, of course, not the fact you can draw from that night.
From one night, no, definitely not. Iduna, it's your turn. the last poem, and we are going to talk afterwards about Trump and the Brexit.
Ja, 2016. Het verschrikkelijke jaar. Een krappe meerderheid stemde voor het referendum. En wij, lieve kanselieren, moeten met zulk gekke werk om kunnen gaan. We moeten de deur kunnen openen voor de pleitbezorgers van de afgang en zeggen: verlaten jullie de gemeenschap? Het is oké. De aarde zal nat zijn, maar niet drassig. Vervolgens moeten we doen alsof we niet verder kijken dan volgende week. Leven in dit bonkende moment. Tips en adviezen verzamelen over de afwikkeling. Onze woede? Weg met onze woede. Een aanpak als de onze kent geen woede. Wij zijn de laatste verdedigsters en het slijk propageert behoedzaamheid. Onze schoenen mogen dat nooit verkeerd begrijpen. Kijk, we moeten groeiende machtshonger herkennen. Top na top bezoeken met onze Amerikaanse bedrijfstrainees. Leren paaien en minachten en weten dat dat hetzelfde gekoer is in huizen als deze. De overmoedige wapperduif herkennen en de kaarsrechte schouders die hij niet kan vinden. Nu moeten we echt aan de slag. Wie denkt dat dit over liefde gaat? Wie presenteert onze onvervangbaarheid? We kunnen het zelf niet meer doen. We hebben een crisis te ontwarren. Alle kalme, droge torren die glanzen in de zon. Aan ons om ze over de onvoorspelbaarheid te leren. Ik ben jullie crisiskanselier en jullie zijn er bijna klaar voor. Jullie tonen geen verdriet. Wat wil ik verder zeggen? Nog even en ik kan alweer gaan slapen.
Thank you, Iduna. Thank you, Iduna, for your contribution. Are you leaving the community? It's fine. The earth will get wet, but not soaked. Well, that turned out to be the case, especially for the EU, maybe less so for the Royal Kingdom. In your book, you give a... You might give a reason for, and also not only all of us, I guess also you know, we were surprised by the outcome of the referendum. Merkel was as well. But you write in your book, viele der Protestwähler, meaning many of the people in the UK who voted for Brexit, hatten das Gefühl, nicht die Anerkennung zu bekommen, die ihnen eigentlich zustehe, auch wenn sie materiell gar nicht zu klagen hatten. Also, it's about recognition, even among people who are well off financially. This is
respect.
Respect. It's about respect.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is this the big explanation, not only for the success of the Brexiteers, but for the AfD, for all the populist right wing, for Trump? It's less about money. It's more about.
A befriended British journalist once told me, who was also very surprised by the turn of events at the Brexit referendum, but she said we were all shocked that people were much more. They were much more angry than we expected, than they were actually anxious of what would happen if we would leave. It's an interesting thing, right?
Yeah.
The anger is much bigger than the fear.
Yeah. The anger is bigger than the fear. Yeah.
In this case, I would say.
I think it's quite interesting. A German scientist some weeks ago said that the populists are successful, especially in shrinking regions. The more a region is shrinking, the more they are voting for populists. And I think that's because people think they are forgotten by the politicians, by the media in the big cities and so on. For example, in Germany we are always debating why flats become always more expensive and more expensive. But there are many regions in Germany where the problem is that I can't sell my house because there's
nobody
no one who wants to buy it. Yeah?
Because there are also no children.
We are not speaking about that. All the young journalists living in the big cities write and say every day, nobody needs a car anymore. But if you go only 50 kilometers out of Berlin, you will discover that it's not possible to exist without a car.
A bit like in the US.
Yeah.
So basically, Mr. Bollmann is saying it's all about demography. Shrinking is not economically shrinking, by definition, it's more population.
Well, I guess populism is really much about being forgotten, especially in the East, as you mentioned. People feel forgotten by the German government, and sometimes rightly so. Of course, there's been invested a lot in infrastructure and all, but still, I believe many of their concerns have not really been addressed, not by Merkel, for example, as well. And well, you want to go to the Brexit, of course.
Yeah. No, it's fine.
I just find it fascinating that she herself has also said that she was shocked that Germany was not as reunited as she had always thought before. It's one of the rare quotes of her to be found on the former GDR, right? In the interview she gave in 2019.
I think it's very difficult. Now at the end of her term, it's possible, of course, but before, it's very difficult for a politician, for a chancellor, not for a minister or something, for a chancellor who comes from a minority to make politics just for this minority. Obama was very much criticized that he didn't do enough for black people in the States. And I think it's the same thing, more or less. Yeah. And now at the end, of course, she is more free to say such
But could she have done more? Could have any politician done more to prevent this anger? You used the word anger, which also exists in large parts of Eastern Germany. And interestingly enough, it's more in the southern part of Eastern Germany than in the northern part. The AfD is especially strong in Thuringia and Saxony.
Yeah, well, I don't know exactly what's the point in Saxony. There are many reasons, I think. That's the industrial tradition of Saxony, and people are very proud about their old industry and always think that it is not enough recognized. There we are back again with recognition and so on, recognized by other people. In the north of the GDR is completely different. It always was a relatively poor region, which was industrialized only at the period of the GDR and so on. And of course, perhaps one part of the thing, especially in Dresden, is that they didn't receive television from the West. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Do you think, both of you, that Merkel handled the Brexit well?
I find it intriguing that she kept giving this polite refusal, actually, to a number of British prime ministers to pay any price to stop them from leaving the EU, right?
Yeah.
And at the same time, she was actually very, very strongly against a no-deal Brexit. So I find it intriguing in your book how you describe her role, and I think it's nice if you want to share that with us tonight as well. This role of hers, this silent diplomacy, that she played.
I think,
Did you find out more about it?
I think she did an excellent job. After some days of hesitation at the beginning, she was not so clear, but then she understood that only this harsh way dealing with Britain would make it possible to keep the rest of Europe together. And that was not so much visible for the public because she traveled to all the European capitals or received her colleagues in Berlin. And so it was possible to have the summit at Bratislava, 1 month or something like that later. And it was not spectacular at all. If you ask other people what was the summit of Bratislava, no one will know that anymore. But that was the success, that the Brexit wasn't a problem for the rest of Europe anymore after that. And I think from that point on, for her, the bigger problem was the election of Donald Trump, of course, because that was a problem of her whole vision of the world, of the West, of liberal democracy, and so on. And then, with Britain, it's a little bit different because Britain was always a difficult partner in the European Union, and you can. If you are speaking with German politicians, for example, Ursula von der Leyen, as a Minister of Defense, she tried to create a defense union in Europe, and she said the problem was always London. Her British colleague first said, we have an election, we have that Brexit vote, and so on. We can't do anything, it's too dangerous, and so on. And it was really, really, really difficult, and I think many things in Europe became much easier.
Well, the defense union is still... Even without the UK, it's very problematic.
It's a little bit easier, yeah.
But basically you are saying, and I would think that we can agree that Brexit was less of an existential thing to Merkel than Trump. When Obama visited her in Berlin, his last visit, after it was already clear that Trump won the election, he declared in Berlin, "I would vote for Merkel." And she responded rather well, pragmatic again, I would say, or rather, maybe also a bit cold.
In public.
In public. Yeah. She said, democracy exists thanks to change.
Yeah, but it was a very crucial moment for her, because I think that she didn't want to recandidate in 2017 because she knew how difficult all that would become afterwards, and to create a new government, to deal with her Bavarian sister party, and so on, and the refugees debate. But at that moment when Donald Trump was elected, in her view, and I think Obama told that to her too, there was no alternative, because we had a very, very difficult situation all over the Western democracies. There was the election in France half a year later, the elections in the Netherlands. In Italy, the political situation was quite complicated. In Poland, the Kaczynski party was elected once more to government, and so on. And she was the last Western leader standing at that moment. And I think that at that point, she thought it was impossible to retire. But of course, that was a thing you can't tell to the public. You can't say, well, I have to recandidate because if not...
Because of what's happening in the US and elsewhere.
At the end of the West.
How close did you come in your research to a reconstruction of this, what is it, 4-hour dinner between Merkel and Obama?
It's a very nice picture in the book.
Yeah. No, of course, nobody knows what except those two persons knows that. I think that it was indeed kind of, as you say in Latin, translatio imperii, to give the leading role of Western democracies from Obama to Merkel. Of course, she always knew that this is too much for a German chancellor, and but that was the situation at that moment. And I'm always astonished when I'm talking with international media from Canada to Australia and so on, how different she is seen than in Germany itself as the leader of the West, and all the things we often criticize in Germany, that she is not outspoken enough, that she always is looking for a compromise. That's what she gets applause for in other countries. If you are listening once more to her famous Harvard speech, after every sentence there was so much applause.
Thanks to Trump.
Especially for quite
Trump.
banal things. When she says, well, in politics we have to look for a compromise. You could think, so what?
But if you have to listen all day long to Donald Trump, this comes like a big relief, of course.
But it's true as well that she was, I believe, the only European leader who, after Trump won the elections, she congratulated him, but she gave him at the same time an enormous list of things one should do.
No, she didn't really congratulate him. She said that was really a sensation that a German chancellor tells the president of the United States of America, who freed Germany from Nazi dictatorship and so on. Perhaps we could collaborate, but only on the basis of Western values.
She gave him conditions.
That was,
But basically, I have the feeling that she gave up on him after a few months already. And then she made this other...
She never really started, I believe, right? With this congratulation.
Well, she did try with the first visit to Trump. She did try to influence him. And then she said at the München Sicherheitskonferenz, the security conference that is every year in Munich, she said that we cannot rely on each other anymore.
Yeah. Cannot rely.
Do you think this changed now with Biden?
Yes. And I think that she can retire much, with a sense of that her mission is completed. It would have been a very, very difficult situation for her if Trump would have been re-elected, because her complicated last term with so much trouble in national politics would have been completely senseless if
another 4 years
at national level things wouldn't have improved.
So maybe if the elections had gone differently in last year in the US, maybe you would have written this book in 4 years.
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
She was so much convinced that she should have to leave just now.
Before we go shortly to the time after Merkel, I'd like to point one more example of the pragmatism of Merkel. And this comes to me it's very symbolic in the law, in the bill that legalizes marriage for gay and lesbians. She voted against the bill. But against, she said that she's happy that the proposal was accepted by the German parliament because she hoped that now a bit of social peace would return. I think this is genius, no? You vote against the bill and then you declare afterwards you are happy that the bill passed.
Yes, but you could say in the beginning she was the chancellor who made it possible that there would be voted personally on this issue.
On your personal conscience.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's why, yes, you could say Merkel enabled gay marriage, or so in Germany, but still, I know also from my podcast that she's seen very critically in the LGBTI community because of her vote against all this.
Of course.
Yeah, but of course that's typical for her. That's the thing with Schäuble, to think the things from the end and not how it looks like at the moment. At the moment, it was very difficult because the conservatives were angry because she opened and made this decision possible. The queer community was angry because she were talking in such a negative way about queer people. But all that was forgotten some weeks later. Yeah? The problem was resolved, and no one was
talked about it anymore.
Yeah.
Before we give the audience a chance to ask questions, what comes after Merkel? Is Scholz really the best incarnation, if I may use that word, of Merkel? Better than Laschet?
Well, I think Mr. Laschet has proven to be not the best Merkel impersonator after he practiced for rather long. And it's fascinating to see, of course, what happens with her party after she will have left in the end. We all do in the Netherlands, we all act as if she has left already, but she's still there, of course. And I think that's fascinating because you see, for example, with this debate about the equal marriage bill, that she has a very conservative party standing behind her. And of course, she shifted the whole paradigm to the middle. But still, there is a very large amount of Germans who are still very conservative. And at the same time, we see this mainly new generation, we talked about demography as well, that really wants change. And the question, of course, is will they get change with this new government?
What happens to the party? You said that the party is more divided than ever over dinner.
Of course, but that's not Merkel's fault, or because in all Western democracies, the middle right, center right parties are in big trouble because the society nowadays is divided about other issues. There is a liberal, cosmopolitan part of the society and a nationalist, social, populist wing. And of course, all the both are in the Christian Democratic Party, and I'm not sure if the party will exist in this form, as we know that, in 5 or 10 years. And this was, of course, one of the biggest problem of Laschet's campaign, that he couldn't give the best Merkel imitator because in his own party there were so many people so critical towards Merkel.
Basically,
it was much easier for Olaf Scholz because among Social Democrats there's no one who hates Angela Merkel. Of course, perhaps not everybody is a fan of her, but no one has a big problem when Olaf Scholz says, "I'm like Angela Merkel."
Well, even
but I think that the new government will have many challenges, of course, which are linked to the reforms which Angela Merkel didn't do.
Okay.
And so they make now this big show about we are the parties of progress, we will make reform, we will change Germany. I think that Angela Merkel sits at home and thinks, well, we will see. We will speak again in 1 or 2 years if all these huge reforms will happen.
Speaking of divisions, I mean, one of the CDU politicians, Hans-Georg Maaßen, campaigned basically against Merkel and against the CDU. And where he campaigned, the AfD won. You said, that's...
But again, don't shoot the messenger, but there are people saying that, because you just said it's not Merkel's fault that her party is so divided, but there are people saying she could have prepared them much better for the time coming after her. Of course, she tried with Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer, AKK, as she's famously named, but she failed. But still, would you say that she could have done more to leave her party more stable than it is now?
No, I think she is right to say democracy is democracy and it's not a monarchy, and you can't decide which politician will follow you. And of course, the new people such as Kramp-Karrenbauer or Armin Laschet have to show that they are able to be chancellor, and they failed both. And I think the problem why they failed has very much to do with the conservative part of the party, because they both were liberals within the Christian Democratic Party, but they had to make so many concessions to the conservatives that they were not visible anymore as liberals, and that the voters in the center
way.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, and also we started the evening with the conclusion that we just have to wait, and then all men will blow themselves up. And also, by the way, I never shoot the messenger. That's against all my moral convictions, Sophie.
Happy you have them.
Yeah, a few, not too many, like Merkel. Yeah. The people in the audience, it's now your turn. You can ask questions in any language. Most languages. And please also say your name, I think that's polite, and also explain to whom the question is directed. And there's going to be a mic. Yes? Jolien is going to walk around with a mic. So raise your hand if you have a question. And everything was clear? It was just too long. You want to go for one? Yeah, there's a question. Yeah.
Aan meneer Bollmann. Afgelopen week was de laatste conferentie in Brussel waar Merkel aanwezig was. En in de Nederlandse pers trok vooral de houding ten opzichte van Polen aandacht. En in het Nederlandse parlement werd een motie aangenomen van we moeten die Polen hard aanpakken vanwege het gebrek aan onafhankelijke rechtspraak. En Merkel moet het daar toch heel moeilijk mee gehad hebben, want voor haar is heel duidelijk dat ze Duitsland nooit de oostelijke grens van Europa mag zijn. Dus de EU kan niet zonder Polen. En tegelijk zit zij ook met dat probleem van die rechtsstatelijkheid.
Wat is de vraag? Komt de vraag nog?
Ja, mijn vraag is van hoe zou Duitsland, Merkel zit er misschien nog een half jaar, of haar opvolger daarmee om moeten gaan?
Yeah. Shall I translate the question quickly? The gentleman was saying that we had this conference in Brussels and the Dutch parliament passed a bill to act strongly against Poland and what's happening there, given the whole judicial system. And correct me if I summarize your words wrong. And the gentleman said maybe this is a disappointment or a problem for Merkel because she realizes that Germany can never become the eastern border of the European community. The EU needs Poland, and we cannot, for that reason, the member states should not act too strongly against Poland. And what's your take on that?
Of course, that's a very important point that which makes a big difference between Merkel's European policy and that of other of Western politicians, just as Schäuble. She never was a fan of a deeper integration of some European states because she always knew what the Eastern European countries contributed to her personal freedom. That the revolution in Eastern Europe started in 1989 or even earlier in Poland, that Hungary was the first country to open the border, and I think that it would be completely impossible for Angela Merkel to push those countries out of Europe. And that's, of course, that's the reason why she is always very cautious in dealing with that problems of rule of law and so on. Of course, she's disgusting what is happening there, and she struggled a lot with Orban and Kaczynski at the time of the refugees crisis. But it is always clear for her that these countries are part of Europe and that this will be has to be forever.
Forever.
Of course, she's pragmatic too, and she sees that this is not possible to push them out because you have to vote. All the others
have to agree.
Have to agree, and of course, at the moment, if you are at least two countries with that problem, that will never be possible.
No. No. Thank you. Any other questions? Yeah, there in the back I see a hand. You can stay. Somebody's coming.
I'll meet the microphone halfway.
Oh, halfway. That's fine. That's a nice compromise.
Ich bin Schrim von der Luft. Ich wohne und lebe in Luxemburg. Was nicht angesprochen wurde heute Abend, ist die ganze Situation zwischen Merkel und Putin und Russland. Deutsch sprechen beide, Russisch sprechen beide, also auf persönlicher Ebene. Gibt es da natürlich Reibungen, aber auch staatspolitisch und politisch überhaupt. Die Pipelines über die Ukraine hinein, die also, sage ich mal offen, von den europäischen Institutionen nicht beliebt wurden, aber nur von Deutschland. Gibt es natürlich auch einen Altkanzler, die sich damit untätig gemacht hat. Ja. Können Sie da vielleicht noch zu kommentieren?
Should I translate? Or? Yeah, anybody who didn't understand the question, I'm not going to translate for nothing. And don't be ashamed.
It's about no shame. Russia, Putin and Merkel.
It's about Putin. And the gentleman rightly says we haven't mentioned Putin. Yeah. We should have mentioned Putin, so finally Putin is here. Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, it's, of course, perhaps it's the most complicated relationship which Angela Merkel ever had in her life, or at least in foreign policy. Because, of course, she knows Putin for a very long time, for all the 16 years of her chancellorship, and I think she can calculate very well how he will behave. That's a big difference, for example, to the erratic Donald Trump. Yeah. But on the other hand, she is discussing what is happening in Russia just now in terms of democracy and aggressions in foreign policy. And I think that she is so much critical towards Putin's politics because she knows Russia so well. Because for many Western politicians, Gerhard Schröder, of course, more than others, say, well, Russia never was a democracy and never will be a democracy. That's normal that there's an authoritarian government and we shouldn't care about that. But she traveled in the Soviet Union in the 70s and 80s, and she knows the country very well. And of course, she knows that this country is able to other things, that it is a country with a great culture and so on. And so, yeah, and that's why she is dealing so much with all that. And I think that made her role in the Ukraine crisis when Obama decided not to involve so much,
to intervene,
and to leave that problem to Angela Merkel, who once more kept Europe together which was not so easy between Poland and the Baltic states, which said, well, we should intervene in Ukraine, and France, which wanted to deliver weapons to Russia at that moment. Yeah.
And it's one of the most interesting questions, I guess, for the future German government.
What to do
the new
with
stance towards Russia, because of course we see the Social Democrats, as just mentioned, have a, well, at least a complicated relation towards Russia. Because of Schröder, because of the Nord Stream pipeline that's very much in favor of many of the Social Democrats. The Greens and the FDP have said to be much more critical about Russia, but of course it's to be seen whether they will really choose to do things not in favor of the German industries.
I'm quite often asked why, when she is so critical towards Putin, why is she in favor of Nord Stream? And I think there are two reasons. One reason is the German Energiewende, the energy policy in Germany, and she is so much under pressure because of the end of nuclear energy. Well, the debate changed a little bit in the recent years, but some years ago there was a discussion, we need the gas for changing our energy
policy. Yeah.
And the other point, of course, is the big pressure of German industry at that.
Needless to say. Well, based on your answers tonight, we can conclude that Angela Merkel kept Europe united, but it didn't manage to keep the CDU-CSU united.
Yeah. Which is more complicated.
Much more complicated, apparently. A last question before we call it a night, and you can go to the wine and the champagne. Yeah, the lady over there.
Zo laat lopen, dat is niet de bedoeling. Mijn naam is Tessa en ik zit op dit moment in de afrondende fase van de masteropleiding Duitslandstudies hier aan de UvA. En het valt me op dat in het gesprek heel vaak gaat over Merkel vanaf 2005 of later. Wat op zich logisch is. Maar waarvoor ik hier eigenlijk kwam en eigenlijk ook het boek heb aangeschaft. Is omdat ik graag wil kijken naar de periode van 1991 tot 1994. Want zoals de heer Bollmann al zei, is het heel makkelijk om met terugwerkende kracht te kijken naar wat iemand heeft gedaan en hoe succesvol iemand is geweest. Maar het valt me vaak op dat er heel veel kapstokjes worden gebruikt in het nieuws. Dus er zijn heel veel stokpaardjes, dingen die terugkomen vanaf 2005. Maar als je
stokpaardjes door wie gebruikt, zodat je onderbreekt? Wie gebruikt de stokpaardjes?
Nou, wat je
Merkel
vaak
zelf,
ziet is, er zit een bepaalde herhaling van grotere dingen. Dus bijvoorbeeld de manier, wat je heel veel in het nieuws ziet, wat dus eigenlijk niks nieuws meer is, de manier waarop ze haar handen vouwt, de bekende ruit. Nou, dat zijn allemaal dingen die we inmiddels allemaal ongeveer weten, ook als we geen verstand van Merkel hebben. Maar wat ik wel interessant vind, is dat het wel lijkt alsof er een bepaalde structuur in haar manier van doen zit, die je al veel eerder ziet dan 2005.
Dat is je vraag? Of?
Nou, de vraag is, wat ik dus hoop, is dat de periode voor 2005 vaak een onderbelicht onderwerp is in haar carrière. En dat is nogal een lange periode.
Ja. Die periode, heb je het boek al gelezen? Die periode wordt behandeld in het boek.
Ja, ik ben er inderdaad mee bezig. Ik heb het boek nu 3 dagen.
Stellen.
Ik ga hem stellen. Mag ik even?
Ja.
Fijn. In ieder geval, de vraag is, hoe denkt de heer Bollmann zelf bij te dragen aan dit onderbelichte onderwerp? Want het is nu makkelijk te zeggen, maar het is natuurlijk best wel heel relevant hoe haar fundament eruit ziet. Als je bedenkt dat dat de basis is voor alles wat na deze tweede...
Ik ga het vertalen, maar vind je dat die vraag ook onderbelicht is in het boek? Want je hebt al wat gelezen.
Nou, het zijn uiteindelijk een pagina of 30, maar het is 16 jaar die het beslaat. Dus ik vraag me af hoe meneer Bollmann zelf denkt bij te dragen aan dit onderbelichte onderwerp.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I'm not sure if it's a question or an accusation, but that's something we will find out later. The lady says that she's missing something tonight in the discussion, but maybe also because she read part of your book, in a book. She's not so much interested in what happened afterwards, after 2004, but how Merkel became Merkel, especially the period of between 1991 and 1994. And she wants to know what you're going to do to disclose more about that time. Is there a book coming about Merkel 91-94?
As a Minister of Women Affairs. Yeah, of course. It's well, we were debating the marriage, queer marriage topic. Yeah. It was quite similar as a Minister of Women when the question of abortion was voted in the federal parliament at that time. And she, as the minister for that topic, didn't take any position.
Any position, again.
Well, and the other thing, of course, was that it was the time of right-wing violence in Eastern Germany, and she was the Minister of Youth, too. And it was especially young people, of course, to attack the houses of foreigners, asylum seekers.
Asylum seekers, yes.
And well, but she was of course, she had no idea how to deal with that problem. But she went to the places. She went to Rostock, where the riots in Lichtenhagen happened in, I think, 1992 or something like that. And that was a big difference, of course, to other politicians. Helmut Kohl, for example, said he didn't want to do sort of tourism, Betroffenheitstourismus, I think he said,
But there is a lot of, I would say, unknown about Merkel, even for Merkel adepts in the book, I can really reassure you. Especially, for example, the fantastic scene that you have written about, that she was approached by two gentlemen who asked her if she would be able to work for the Stasi. And she said, "Oh no, I would definitely not be able not to tell my husband about it." And this whole played naivete of hers is, I think, an interesting one. Coming back to the question, this whole unpretentiousness.
Merkel became Merkel.
Is it calculated expression of power? I would say we find an answer.
When the Stasi, I'm not sure, but maybe this space for more books on Merkel. Are you going to write them?
No, definitely not.
Before the audience, before going to make my final announcement, I announced at the beginning that you could win a glass of champagne, 2 glasses of wine, and 3 glasses of apple juice if you come up with a German translation of the title.
What was it again?
De gom uit de hond halen. Or is there already a German translation of the title? No, 9. Anyone who quickly wants to take a try? De gom uit de hond halen in German.
De gom of de grom?
De grom. To take the growl out of the dog. No champagne for you tonight? Poor people. Okay. Maybe later. You can approach me in the bar. Iduna Palman, thank you for your poems. They were beautiful. And I brought some lights to the evening. Sophie Derksen, thank you for being here. You were really like a treasure. And I hope one time I will be able to interview you, so you will give some answers, maybe. No, it was a pleasure. Thank you for being here.
I'm a journalist. I ask questions.
Ralph Bollmann is going to sign books afterwards, and not only for you, but also for your grandparents, your neighbors, your uncles, your kids, and your dogs. So you can buy at least 5 of his books, because there are plenty of books. I recommend doing so, and you are happy to be here and to sign all of your books. Even books not written by Ralph Bollmann. Ralph Bollmann, thank you for being here. It was a pleasure that you were here. We will meet again. Thank you.